On May 7th, 2011, just after dawn settled over Bournemouth, a 17-year-old girl with her whole future ahead of her was found unresponsive. And from that moment, nothing about this case would ever be simple. Behind the walls of that house were secrets, accusations, and a family whose behavior would shock the nation. And just 5 years later, on the morning of January the 12th, 2016, in a secluded bungalow set deep within the grounds of an old Welsh estate, another young woman vanished without a trace. By the time anyone realized she hadn't arrived to collect her daughter, the truth was already slipping into something darker, a truth involving money, obsession, hidden recordings, and a man whose private life was nothing like the polished image he presented. This is the story of two young women whose lives were cut short, and how the men closest to them built a path that led straight to tragedy. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Before anything went wrong, Emily Longley's world looked bright. Born in Britain but raised in Auckland, she had moved back across the world less than a year earlier, settling with her British grandparents in Bournemouth while she studied and worked. Those who knew her described her as warm, fun-loving, and impossibly easy to like. She had enrolled at Brockenhurst College, balancing coursework with a part-time job at Topshop. The plan was simple: study, earn a bit of money, and build the foundations of the career she wanted. Modeling had become a real possibility, not just an idea. She was young, photogenic, and quietly ambitious, taking small steps into the industry through local shoots and assignments. To her family, she was still the teenager who cracked jokes at the dinner table and drifted between excitement and uncertainty, but there was no question she was starting to shape her own identity. Underneath that were the quieter, more complicated parts of her life, the relationships, friendships, and decisions that any teenager might stumble through. To the outside world, she was doing all the right things. And it was during this period of rebuilding and optimism that she met someone whose presence would alter the course of her life entirely, a relationship that would become the center of everything that came next. When Emily first crossed paths with Elliot Turner, he was nothing like the people she had been trying to leave behind. Turner was the son of a wealthy jeweler, an ex-public schoolboy who had grown up surrounded by comfort, entitlement, and the unwavering confidence that money could fix almost anything. At just 20, he projected the image of someone who had already lived far more than his years suggested. His world revolved around fast cars, designer labels, luxury nights out, and the people who fed off that lifestyle. It was a polished surface built to impress, but underneath it lay volatility. To many in Bournemouth, Turner was known long before Emily ever met him. He bragged openly, carried himself with arrogance, and cultivated a persona centered on status. Champagne, Bentleys, and girls, as he reportedly called it. Cocaine use was part of that world as well, and for someone like Emily, who was navigating new friendships, trying to fit in, and experiencing life in a new country, that confidence may have initially appeared exciting rather than dangerous. But the glamour came with a sense of control. We will talk about this in a few minutes. Around him was a group he called the Firm, friends who came from similar backgrounds and tended to support whatever he said or did. They rarely challenged his behavior, and their silence only reinforced his sense of entitlement. For Emily, what began as a thrilling connection soon revealed a darker undercurrent. What happened next would expose just how far Turner's need for dominance could go, and how quickly admiration could turn into something far more menacing. As the relationship deepened, Elliot Turner's behavior shifted from possessive to openly dangerous. What had once been framed as passion or jealousy soon escalated into a pattern of threats, intimidation, and outright violence. Friends of Emily would later describe how his reactions became sharper and more unpredictable the moment she tried to distance herself. There were documented threats, not just angry words spoken in private, but explicit, chilling statements about harming her. On more than one occasion, he threatened to kill her, even describing the use of a lump hammer. These were not empty outbursts. They fitted a pattern that stretched back to his previous relationships, where two former girlfriends reported stalking, harassment, and threatening behavior. Turner's obsession with control was not new. It had simply found a new focus in Emily. During the trial, prosecution witness Oliver George, 18, described how Turner had criticized Emily for what she was wearing, claiming it would attract attention from other boys. Emily told him she would dress how she wished, and later that night, CCTV showed Turner arriving at the same venue. Emily left soon after, with Turner attempting to follow her. Oliver George recalled Turner shouting that Emily had ruined his life and twisted his heart. Jurors also saw messages from Emily's friends describing how Turner had had a hissy fit and tried to punch her. A week earlier, footage from the Bella Rosa bar in Canford Cliffs was shown, with prosecutors alleging that Turner had assaulted Emily off camera by smashing her head against a table, a stark example of how his temper overpowered any concern for consequences. Turner's fixation extended into her online presence as well. Social media became another battleground. If Emily posted a modeling photo, chatted with male friends, or appeared in pictures alongside topless butlers during an event, Turner reacted with rage. And that exactly became the pivotal point that turned their relationship into far darker. Emily confided to friends that she felt trapped, scared, and unsure how to break free. She had tried to end the relationship several times, but each attempt triggered a stronger, more controlling backlash from Turner. This escalating violence created a pressure point, and soon, the tension between Emily's attempts to escape and Turner's refusal to let her go would collide in a moment that changed everything. On the evening before her death, Emily Longley returned to the Turner family home on Queenswood Avenue in Bournemouth, a place she had been before, a house that outwardly presented comfort and privilege. But behind its doors, the atmosphere had been strained for weeks. What triggered him that night had been building for weeks. He had gone through Emily's phone again, scrolling through messages, modeling shots, and social media posts. Among the images were the photographs taken at Sandbanks Ladies' Day, the ones showing Emily posing with semi-naked, cheeky buff butlers. She was seen playfully interacting with one of the performers, a light-hearted moment captured for promotional material. But to Turner, they were a source of anger and embarrassment. In court, prosecutors described how those photographs had infuriated him. He later admitted they upset him, even though they were part of her early efforts in modeling. These weren't isolated reactions. Turner had confronted her repeatedly over similar images before, insisting they were inappropriate. What happened next was not sudden panic or a loss of control. The court found that Turner had been thinking about killing her, what we have already discussed. On this night, he acted on them. In the quiet of his bedroom, Turner wrapped his arm around the 17-year-old's neck and forced her face into a pillow. Pressure, weight, and silence. When police attended the scene hours later, they saw the imprint of the pillow still visible across her skin. It was the mark of what she endured in those final moments. Pressure applied deliberately, long enough to kill, long enough to leave a trace. When he realized what he had done, Turner did not call for help. He did not shout for his parents upstairs. Instead, he manufactured a narrative. He later claimed he woke to find her dead beside him, as though he had slept through her final breaths. But the physical evidence, the pillow marks, and the forensic findings dismantled that story immediately. It was a lie, built on panic, not remorse. Hours after Emily's death, the Turner household shifted from panic to calculation. What unfolded inside that Bournemouth home would later become one of the most disturbing elements of the investigation. Not just the murder itself, but the collective effort to hide it. Detectives, aware something was amiss, made the decision to covertly bug the property. What those recordings captured would reveal a family not grieving, not shocked, but discussing how best to erase the truth. Police listening devices picked up conversations between Turner and his parents, Anita and Lee, as they tried to piece together a story that might protect him. The tone was calm, practical, disturbingly methodical. Rather than urging their son to tell the truth, they focused on identifying anything that might incriminate him and removing it before officers came back through the door. At one point, he complained that Emily has ruined my life. Instead of challenging him, Anita replied, "She has." One of the clearest examples came when they discussed a confession letter Turner had written shortly after the killing. Instead of handing it over to police, Anita and Lee destroyed it. They took the pages, doused them in bleach, and attempted to eliminate every trace of what he had admitted on paper. Investigators later referred to this as a deliberate act, a conscious effort to obstruct justice. There were other actions too. Anita quietly removed Turner's coat from the room where Emily died. It was a small gesture, but a revealing one. She didn't know whether fibers, DNA, or any physical transfer might be present, but she wasn't going to risk leaving it in plain sight. The coat vanished before officers could examine it. But the most revealing exchange came between the parents themselves. At one point, Lee told Anita to stop pretending otherwise and said plainly that their son had strangled Emily. It was a clear acknowledgement, not speculation, not confusion, but a father stating plainly what they all knew. At the same time, Turner was getting ready to leave. When detectives searched the house, they found a suitcase already packed and his passport in his pocket. It was clear he was preparing to run. Rather than telling him to stay and tell the truth, his mother focused on shaping a defense. She suggested he should claim he acted in self-defense and reminded him of what to say and what to avoid. It showed that, even in the hours after Emily's death, the priority inside the house was protecting him, not facing what had happened. With every recorded conversation, detectives were able to reconstruct what had taken place in the hours after the murder. When the evidence became impossible to ignore, police arrested Elliot Turner and held him without bail. His parents were arrested shortly after and released on bail pending trial. And as the case moved to court, those recordings would follow them, ensuring the truth they tried to bury became the very thing that sealed their fate. When the case finally reached Winchester Crown Court in 2012, the atmosphere inside the courtroom became a stark continuation of everything investigators had seen behind closed doors. From the early days of the trial, his arrogance was unmistakable. He sat stony-faced as witnesses described Emily's final months, barely reacting as friends spoke about her fear or as forensic experts explained how she had been killed. When the verdict came, the judge addressed him with a clarity that cut through every excuse raised during the case. He described Turner's lack of remorse as chilling and his arrogance as breathtaking. These were not charged words spoken in anger. They were the court's measured assessment of a young man who had spent months threatening, controlling, and ultimately killing a 17-year-old girl, only to present himself as the victim of her behavior. In the aftermath of the trial, Emily's family were left devastated by the loss of a daughter described as warm, bright, and full of promise. Her father struggled with guilt and anger, calling Turner an evil charmer, while her grandparents, who had cared for her in Bournemouth, carried a deep and lasting sorrow. Elliot Turner was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years before he can be considered for parole. He also received an additional 9-month sentence for perverting the course of justice, though this was ordered to run concurrently and did not extend his time in custody. But Turner wasn't the only one facing consequences. His father, Lee Turner, was sentenced to 27 months in prison for perverting the course of justice after helping his son destroy evidence. His mother, Anita Turner, received the same sentence of 27 months for her role in the cover-up. Both parents served roughly half of their sentences before being released, and in the years that followed, Anita faced potential deportation because of her conviction and her status as a non-UK national. In November 2014, A report stated that Anita Turner would face a Home Office immigration hearing on December 19th, where she would learn whether she would be deported from the UK. But as of now, there is no publicly verified update in the sources I reviewed that confirms whether she was actually deported or whether the decision was overturned, suspended, or still pending. With Emily's case concluded, another tragedy was already unfolding elsewhere, one driven by secrecy, wealth, and control. Before her name ever appeared in headlines, Georgina Symonds was simply known as a bright, lively young woman from Newport. At 25 years old, she was a mother, a daughter, a friend, and someone who was trying, often against difficult odds, to build a stable, happy life for herself and her little girl. She had a natural charisma, an easy confidence, and a vivid personality that made her instantly memorable. But behind that brightness were very real challenges. Like many young mothers, she was determined to provide for her daughter in whatever way she could. In her early 20s, Georgina had been a burlesque dancer, enjoying the performance world, the glamour, and the independence it offered. Eventually, she transitioned into escorting, not out of recklessness or thrill-seeking, but out of a practical need to support her child. To her, the work was transactional, a way to generate income quickly while maintaining flexibility as a single parent. At the center of her personal life was Peter Dean, the father of her daughter. The two had been together for years, navigating young parenthood and financial pressures side by side. Their relationship was imperfect, but deeply connected. Even after they separated, they continued to share emotional ties, co-parenting responsibilities, and a complicated but enduring bond. But in the year leading up to her death, Georgina experienced two devastating losses that changed everything. First, her father passed away, a blow that left her shaken and grief-stricken. Only months later, Peter Dean, struggling with emotional turmoil and unable to cope with the situation unfolding in Georgina's life, died by suicide. His death broke her. Friends described her as lost after losing both her father and the man she once saw as her future. And tragically, those vulnerabilities would place her directly in the path of someone who was far more dangerous than she realized. A man whose wealth, obsession, and paranoia would draw her into a situation she could never escape. Before he became the center of a criminal investigation, Peter Morgan was widely known as a successful businessman, a multi-millionaire property developer, a father of two, and a longtime husband. To the outside world, he appeared disciplined, driven, and financially astute. His fortune had been built through a company that manufactured prefabricated chicken huts, a business that grew far beyond its early expectations. When he eventually sold it, Morgan became wealthy almost overnight. With money came expansion. Morgan invested heavily in property and land, eventually purchasing Pencoed Castle, a centuries-old estate in South Wales. The castle became one of the most striking symbols of his success, and with it came a lifestyle that few around him could relate to. He bought helicopters, sports cars, motorbikes, and even ex-military tanks, indulging in expensive hobbies that seemed far removed from the quiet family life he had once lived. Over time, those who knew him began to see subtle but unmistakable changes. Morgan was entering what some described as a midlife shift, turning away from stability and routine and toward a more extravagant, impulsive existence. After a trip to Amsterdam with friends, he began paying escorts for companionship and intimacy, something that marked a dramatic break from the life he presented publicly. And then, in December 2011, he met Georgina Symonds. Unlike the other escorts he had hired, Georgina had an energy that immediately captivated him. What began as a transactional interaction quickly evolved into something far more intense, at least for Morgan. We will talk about this in a few minutes. But the most alarming changes were the ones no one knew about yet. The quiet steps he was taking behind the scenes, all driven by fear that he was losing the one person he believed he could buy forever. What began as a paid arrangement between Georgina Symonds and Peter Morgan quickly grew into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. From the moment he became fixated on her, Morgan used his immense wealth to build a world around Georgina that he believed he could control. He projected romantic meaning into every encounter. Soon, he was paying her £10,000 a month to be his exclusive personal escort, a deal he insisted on to ensure she saw no other men. He covered nearly every aspect of her life. He paid for her cosmetic procedures, funded trips, bought her gifts, and rented a secluded bungalow for her on the grounds of Pencoed Castle, a property he owned and planned to restore. To Georgina, this arrangement was simply part of the job, a client willing to pay generously for exclusive access. Her friends later said she referred to him as Rich Pete, a nickname that reflected exactly what he represented. The more he interpreted her professionalism as affection, the more he convinced himself that their connection was genuine. For Georgina, the situation was complicated. After the devastating losses of her father and partner, she hoped that by stabilizing her income through Morgan, she could eventually build a secure future for herself and her daughter, and then step away. But that plan only increased the imbalance. As the months passed, his need for control intensified. And the moment he realized Georgina wasn't his to control, his behavior shifted from obsessive to dangerous, setting the stage for a confrontation that had been building for months. By late 2015, the arrangement between Georgina Symonds and Peter Morgan had reached a breaking point. During this period, she began a new relationship with Thomas Ballinger, someone far closer to her age and lifestyle. Friends said he brought a sense of normality back into her life, something she had been missing amid the secrecy and tension surrounding Morgan. With this new relationship came a decision. Georgina planned to leave Morgan entirely. Her intention was to return to escorting in London, rebuild her earnings independently, and move forward without the complications tied to him. But what Georgina wasn't aware of that he was well aware of each one of the plan. In late 2015, he installed a covert listening device in Georgina's bungalow. Disguised as a simple white plug adapter, it was something she would never notice, but something he could dial into at any time. Morgan listened for up to 2 hours every day, monitoring her conversations, her movements, even her private frustrations. He was no longer just a wealthy client. He had become a watcher, tracking her life from a distance and feeding his own suspicions. In one of the recorded conversations, he overheard Georgina talking about using information from their time together as leverage. She was recorded saying she would fleece him and threaten to expose compromising photographs and videos of threesomes that had taken place in his marital home. Morgan interpreted her comments as blackmail, a threat to his reputation, his family, and the life he had built. The recordings also suggested this was not the first time Georgina had used such tactics. There was evidence that she had blackmailed other clients in the past, relying on their desire for secrecy to secure additional money or protection. Georgina also talked about wanting ownership of the bungalow, viewing it as security for herself and her daughter. She believed that holding the footage gave her bargaining power over Morgan and that she could use it to protect her future. Those taped conversations would become the catalyst for what followed, pushing a man already obsessed and unstable into planning something he believed would solve every problem at once. On 10th of January 2016, he sat down and wrote what prosecutors would later describe as a murder shopping list, a handwritten set of items that revealed a calculated plan, not a moment of panic. The list, simple at first glance, contained coded entries like string, O2 SIM, poly, glove, snip, handle, tape, special K, starter, rag, adapter. But to investigators, those words would later match, piece by piece, the equipment used to kill Georgina and conceal what he had done. He began collecting the items immediately. Among them was a metal pole, lengths of rope, and sheets of polythene, materials that had no connection to any legitimate task he was involved in. Each object had a purpose, and when laid out together by prosecutors, the picture they created was unmistakable. On the morning of the 12th of January 2016, Peter Morgan drove to the secluded bungalow he had rented for Georgina, a place meant to keep her close and dependent, but which had become the center of his fears and suspicions. When he arrived, Georgina was on the phone to a friend, sounding relaxed, unaware that Morgan had already spent days preparing for what he was about to do. He waited until she ended the call, then walked inside, carrying the plan he had built piece by piece. According to the prosecution, Morgan made one final attempt to persuade her to abandon the footage and the leverage he believed she held over him. He offered her the deeds to the bungalow and even mentioned that she could benefit from a £1 million life insurance policy he claimed was in place. In his mind, this was the last chance to stop what he saw as blackmail. But Georgina refused. She intended to leave the arrangement, rebuild her life, and no longer be tied to him or his money. What happened next unfolded exactly as the prosecution described. Morgan moved from negotiation to violence. Using baling twine, he looped it around her neck. Before tightening it, he placed a towel over her face, later telling police he did not want to see her expression. Georgina fought back. The struggle was clear, and Morgan later admitted she spoke during the assault, telling him, "You're going to pay for this," a final act of defiance that stayed with investigators throughout the trial. But Morgan continued. By the time Morgan stopped, Georgina was motionless on the floor of the bungalow. But Morgan's actions inside only marked the beginning of what would become an even colder effort to hide what he had done. And within minutes of the killing, he set about the next stage of his plan, removing her body and deciding where he would hide it. He wrapped Georgina's body in polythene and layers of tape. To make her easier to maneuver, he secured the bundle to a metal pole, allowing him to lift and angle it so it would fit into the boot of his Porsche Cayenne. He then drove her to Beach Hill Farm, land not far from his family home, where he had access to large outbuildings and agricultural machinery. There, he concealed her body behind stored equipment, confident the location's isolation would prevent anyone from stumbling across it. Once the task was done, Morgan returned to routine as though nothing had happened. He fed his dogs, made bank visits, and carried on conversations with the quiet composure of someone managing an ordinary day. Meanwhile, when Georgina failed to collect her daughter, concern quickly spread among those who knew her. Morgan did not wait to see how the situation developed. Instead, he inserted himself into the search. He contacted acquaintances, expressed worry about her whereabouts, and even drove around under the guise of looking for her, presenting himself as a helpful figure rather than the last person to see her alive. Police began checking timelines, phone activity, and CCTV. Footage soon showed Morgan moving the body from the bungalow, confirming that his involvement went far beyond a simple visit. The evidence closed in quickly. Faced with a sequence of images and movements he could no longer explain away, Morgan's confidence began to erode. In the early hours at the police station, around 4:45 a.m., he finally broke. He told officers what he had done, describing the killing and the purpose behind, and the hours that followed. He admitted he had strangled her that morning and spoke about feelings he claimed to have had for her, a final attempt to frame the act as emotional rather than planned. But by then, prosecutors already had the shopping list, the surveillance tapes, the CCTV, and the recovery of Georgina's body. The confession merely confirmed what the investigation had already made clear. And with that admission, the case moved toward the courtroom, where Morgan's meticulous preparations and the motive behind them would be laid bare in full. In late 2016, at Newport Crown Court, the case against Peter Morgan moved from investigation to a full criminal trial. His defense argued that Morgan's actions had been influenced by Asperger's syndrome, claiming the condition affected his emotional responses, decision-making, and ability to manage stress. His legal team insisted that he was overwhelmed, panicked, and unable to think clearly when confronted with Georgina's alleged plans to fleece him. To support this, 2 defense experts testified about his social rigidity, his anxiety, and his difficulty coping with perceived betrayal. But when cross-examined, these arguments began to unravel. The prosecution presented their own expert, who concluded that although Morgan did show traits associated with Asperger's, the condition was mild and did not impair his understanding of right and wrong. The expert emphasized that Morgan ran companies, handled complex finances, negotiated property deals, and demonstrated strategic planning, all inconsistent with someone whose judgment was significantly impaired. By December 21, 2016, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Peter Morgan was guilty of murder. During sentencing, Mr. Justice Neil Garnham delivered a stark assessment of Morgan's actions. He rejected the diminished responsibility argument entirely and condemned the killing as carefully planned and calmly executed. He emphasized that Morgan's claim of being overwhelmed or emotionally unstable did not align with his behavior before, during, or after the murder. The judge noted that Morgan's Asperger's reduced his culpability only to a modest extent, but not enough to change the legal outcome. Morgan was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 25 years before he can be considered for parole. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK Crime Documentaries.